A blind girl stood backstage mocked by the world's greatest pianist. But when she sat at the piano, something unexpected happened. Her fingers didn't just play music, they became it. Now the world was about to hear the truth she'd been hiding all along. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The concert hall shimmered beneath golden lights, its walls echoing with the sound of applause. The audience stood clapping for the great pianist Brentford Hale, whose fingers had just danced across the keys of a grand piano. He smiled as he took his final bow, his suit shining under the stage lights. Cameras flashed, people cheered. Brentford soaked it all in like he always did. To him, this was just another evening of perfection. Behind the heavy curtains, far from the crowd, a quiet girl stood with her back pressed against the cold wall. Her name was Lena. She was 14 years old, blind since birth. She held a white cane in one hand, her fingers trembling. Though she had never seen the lights or faces of the crowd, she could feel their energy through the floor beneath her feet. She had listened to every note Brentford played. To her, music was not just sound. It was her way of seeing the world. Her heart pounded as Brentford walked toward the backstage area. This was her moment. She didn't know why, but something inside her whispered that she had to speak. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Brentford turned, slightly surprised. "I want to play like you someday." He blinked. Then his eyes moved down, scanning her cane and soft expression. His smile faded into something else. A smirk. "You want to play like me?" he repeated, louder, now making sure others could hear. Some of the crew nearby paused to listen. "Music isn't for people who can't even see the keys," he said with a short laugh. Chuckles echoed around the room. Lena felt her face grow hot. She lowered her head, trying to hide the sting behind her expression. She didn't cry. She never did. But the words cut deep. Brentford turned and walked away, proud and tall, enjoying the laughter that followed him. The hallway felt colder now. The sound of footsteps and voices faded, leaving Lena standing alone, in the silence. But the silence didn't hurt her. Not in the way others thought it would. For Lena, silence was familiar, comforting. It was in the silence where she listened the deepest. She placed her cane beside her and sat on a small bench in the corner of the backstage corridor. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her chest tight, with something hard to name. Shame? Anger? No, it wasn't either. It was something stronger, something fierce. His words had bruised her dream. Yes, but they had not broken it. Deep inside her chest, like a small spark in dry grass, a fire was starting to grow. Nobody saw what she saw. Not because she was blind, but because she could feel things in a way others didn't. Music wasn't about sight. It was about feeling, understanding, telling a story. And she had one to tell. Lena sat there for a while, eyes closed, breathing in the silence. Then slowly, she opened her hand and ran her fingers across her thigh as if they were keys. Soft, silent practice. It was how she learned. It was how she escaped. Just then, the soft sound of a mop dragging across the floor interrupted her thoughts. She looked up, or at least in the direction of the sound. Slow footsteps approached. The smell of old cleaning liquid followed. "Rough night?" asked a kind voice. It was deep but gentle, like it had been worn down over the years. Lena nodded. She didn't have the words to explain what had happened. Maybe she didn't need to. The man placed his mop against the wall and sat beside her. His name was Thomas. He was the night janitor, someone who always arrived after the shows to clean up what the crowd left behind. He didn't speak at first. He just sat with her, letting the silence settle once again. "Don't listen to him," Thomas said after a while. "I was a jazz player once, not famous, but I played from the heart." Lena turned her head toward him, surprised. She hadn't expected that. "Hurt my hand in a car accident years ago," he continued. "Couldn't play like I used to, so I took this job. But I still remember the music. I hear it in you." Lena tilted her head, unsure of what to say. If you want, Thomas offered. I could teach you a few things, not like they teach in music schools. I'll show you how to listen close, how to feel the rhythm, how to let your hands find the keys through your heart. Lena felt something shift in her chest, a tiny bit of warmth in the cold. I'd like that, she whispered. Thomas nodded. Then we'll start tomorrow, after hours, when it's just the music and us. As he stood and picked up his mop, he gave her one last smile, not out of pity, but out of belief. That night, something changed in Lena. She wasn't just going to prove someone wrong. She wasn't going to chase applause. She was going to find her own sound. The shadows behind the spotlight had found a voice. It just hadn't been heard yet. The next night, the concert hall was quiet. The applause, the crowds, the noise, gone. Only soft echoes of the past remained in the empty space. The stage stood in silence, and the lights above hummed gently like sleepy stars. It was in this stillness that Lena returned, guided by the sound of her cane tapping gently against the floor. Thomas was already waiting near. The piano, his old cap pulled low and a gentle smile hidden beneath his worn face. He had pushed a small stool beside the grand piano and wiped the keys clean, as if preparing them for something sacred. You came, he said softly. You said we'd start tonight, Lena replied, setting her cane beside the bench. Then, let's begin. Thomas didn't rush. He didn't speak of technique or theory. Instead, he asked her to sit and place her fingers gently on the keys. Don't press anything yet, he said. Just feel them. Her hands moved slowly, sliding across the smooth surface. The keys were cool at first, but familiar in a strange way. She had touched pianos before, but never like this. Never with someone guiding her not through sight, but through sound and trust. Now close your eyes, Thomas said, then chuckled. I suppose you already have that part covered. Lena smiled. It was the first time she had done so since the night Brentford mocked her. You don't need to see the keys, Thomas continued. You need to hear the space between them. He hummed a simple melody, soft and steady. Do you hear it? He asked. Yes, Lena whispered. Now find it. She pressed a key, then another, slowly, carefully, matching the notes she heard in her mind. Thomas nodded. Good. Don't try to copy me. Just follow the feeling. Every night after that, they met in the empty hall. Thomas would mop the floors with one hand and hum with the other. Lena would listen, repeat, and let her fingers find the notes. Some nights, Thomas would tap out rhythms on the wood of the piano with a broomstick. Other nights, he would play old jazz records from a tiny speaker tucked in his cart. They didn't always talk, but they always listened. To the silence, to the music, and to each other. Days turned into weeks. Lena's hands grew more confident. Her fingers no longer trembled when they hovered above the keys. They danced, slow at first, then with rhythm and life. She learned to hear when a note was too soft or too sharp. She learned to feel when her body tensed and how to let go. Thomas never told her she was wrong. He only asked, "What did it sound like to you?" And Lena would think, adjust, and try again. He showed her how to speak through the piano when she couldn't find words. When she felt joy, her notes bounced. When she felt pain, they sank low and slow. The piano became her voice, her story, her truth. Outside those nights, Lena kept her secret. She didn't tell her parents. She didn't tell her classmates. She just practiced in silence, the music playing in her mind everywhere she went. On the bus, in the kitchen, even while brushing her hair. Thomas watched her grow like a gardener watches a seed become a tree. He never asked her why she wanted to learn. He knew. He had seen the look in her face that night after Brentford's insult. He had felt the fire she didn't know how to name. One night, as snow fell gently outside and the cold crept through the old windows, Lena played a tune so soft it felt like a whisper. Thomas stood nearby, his mop forgotten, eyes closed. When she finished, she turned to him. Was it good? Thomas opened his eyes slowly. It wasn't good, he said. It was honest. Lena didn't need more than that. Soon after, something changed in her. Not her talent, her purpose. It was no longer about proving anyone wrong, not even Brentford Hale. It was about showing the world who she really was without speaking a single word. One morning, Lena sat at home scrolling through a school newsletter printed in Braille. A small section mentioned an upcoming youth showcase at the concert hall. The city's best young talents would be performing. The guest of honor? Brentford Hale. She paused, her fingers resting on the dots. Then she smiled. She didn't tell Thomas, not yet. Instead, she filled out the entry form in her own quiet way. In the section for stage name, she typed only 3 letters. LAN, no photo, no school, no training, just one note. Self-taught pianist. Thomas continued teaching her, never asking what she was planning. Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't need to. Each night she practiced with more focus. Each chord felt heavier with meaning. Each note carried the weight of memories, both bitter and beautiful. And all the while, her fingers remembered. Not just the music, but the journey, the silence. The old hands that guided hers. The promise she made the night she was mocked. And the truth she was ready to share. Her hands were no longer trembling. They were ready to speak. The night of the showcase arrived quietly. Outside, the city was covered in a blanket of snow, the air crisp and still. Inside the concert hall, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. It was the kind of night that made the grand piano shine even brighter under the soft glow of the stage lights. But for Lena, none of that mattered. She had signed up under a name no one knew, LAN. No pictures, no background, no expectations, just the music. Backstage, the other performers prepared in small, tight groups. Some whispered nervously, others practiced their pieces over and over. Lena sat alone in the corner, her cane resting beside her, her fingers twitching with nervous energy. She had never played in front of so many people before, let alone in front of Brentford Hale, the man who had mocked her so many months ago. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall, calling the first performer onto the stage. Lena's heart beat a little faster, but she kept her head down. The soft noise of heels clicking on the stage floor sounded far away. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and imagined the keys under her fingers. There was no fear here, only the music. As each name was called, Lena's palms grew sweaty. It was her turn now. LAN, the announcer said. She stood up slowly, feeling her cane tap gently against the smooth wood floor. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lena didn't pay attention to them. She didn't need to. The stage was set before her. The piano sat like a quiet giant in the center of the room. The soft, cushioned bench was waiting. She could almost hear the keys calling to her. She took her first step onto the stage, the sound of her cane tapping sharply in the silence. As she moved closer to the piano, she could feel eyes on her. There was no mistaking the shock in the crowd. She knew they hadn't expected her. Not like this. The whispers were still there, just as she imagined them. Who is she? Why is she up there? But none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the music. She had learned to trust her ears. She had learned to trust her heart. Now it was time to share it all with the world. Lena sat at the bench, her cane resting beside her. She placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, everything was still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The soft lighting from the stage wrapped around her like a blanket. And then, with a deep breath, she pressed the first key. The note was soft, searching, almost hesitant, but it was real. It was her. Her hands moved across the keys with the quietest grace, each note finding its place in the melody. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was full of her soul. The crowd fell silent. Lena couldn't see their faces, but she could feel their stillness. They were listening. They were waiting. She could feel their hearts move in rhythm with hers. The music began to swell. Each note grew bolder, more alive. It was a song of struggle, of growth, of fire that wouldn't burn out. It told a story, her story, without words, without sight. The melody was rich with emotion, filled with moments of pain and joy that no one but her could truly understand. But somehow the audience began to understand too. They began to feel it. As her hands danced over the keys, Lena felt something shift inside her. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It wasn't even about Brentford or the people who had laughed at her. It was about her love for music. Her need to let it speak when words failed. The song reached its peak. It was no longer gentle or soft. Now it was wild, free, like a wave crashing against the shore. Lena's fingers moved faster, pulling every bit of energy from the piano. Her body swayed with the rhythm. She poured everything she had into each note, each chord. There was nothing left inside her but the music. She didn't know how long she had been playing. Time felt like it had stopped. She could only hear the sound of the keys, the beating of her heart, and the breaths of the people around her. Everything else faded away. Even the fear that had once lived inside her seemed to vanish. When the last note fell into place, the hall was completely still. For a moment there was only silence. Then slowly, one person began to clap. Then another, and another. Soon, the entire hall was filled with thunderous applause. Lena sat still, her hands resting gently on the keys. She didn't look around, at the crowd. She didn't need to. The applause wasn't for her. It was for the music. The music that had been her voice when she couldn't find the words. From the corner of her eye, she saw Brentford Hale standing in the front row. His face was pale. His eyes were wide. She could feel his gaze on her, but it didn't matter. He had heard her now. He had heard the music that she had become, and there was no mocking in his eyes anymore. The applause grew louder. Lena finally stood up, bowing gracefully. Not in triumph, not in revenge, but in peace. The journey she had, started so many months ago, of proving to herself that she could be more than the world saw, had come full circle. She didn't need to see the keys. She had become the music. Backstage, Thomas watched from the shadows, his eyes glistening. He had known she could do it. He had known she could rise above it all. He didn't need applause to know that Lena had found her place on the stage. As the crowd's applause continued to echo, Lena walked off the stage. Brentford stepped aside as she passed. No words were exchanged, but the respect in his eyes said everything. Lena had done it. And the world had listened. The applause echoed for what felt like forever, the sound crashing through the air like a storm. It was a roar, a wave of recognition that filled every corner of the concert hall. Lena stood on the stage, her body still, her hands resting on the piano. She didn't move, didn't look around, and didn't acknowledge the claps or cheers. She had poured everything into the music, and now all that was left was the silence that followed. The audience, now on their feet, clapped and cheered with wild enthusiasm. But Lena remained focused. Her eyes were slightly lowered, as if she were listening to something deeper than the sounds around her. She wasn't listening to the noise of the crowd or the praise they offered. No, her attention was elsewhere, drawn inward. It was the silence after the music that she craved. She stood there for what seemed like a long time, the room alive with excitement. But to her, it was just the hum of sound in the distance. Everything faded into the background as she allowed herself to feel the quietness that had settled over her. It wasn't the stillness of defeat or loneliness. It was a peaceful kind of silence. A silence that only those who truly understand music could ever recognize. It was the silence of the soul, of a journey that had begun long ago in a dim backstage corridor when a cruel laugh had wounded her spirit. But now, as she stood on that stage, it wasn't the sound of mockery that she heard. It was the quiet hum of her own truth. The truth that had risen from her fingertips, note by note, until it filled the hall and broke through the walls of doubt. After a moment, she turned toward the edge of the stage where Thomas stood watching her. His eyes glistened with pride, but he didn't move toward her. He didn't need to. Their connection had always been in the music. in the hours they spent together side by side, learning not just how to play, but how to feel. The applause started to quiet down, replaced by the soft murmur of conversations and whispers among the audience. Lena finally allowed herself to move. Slowly, she stood up from the bench and took a graceful bow. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. It wasn't for the crowd. It wasn't even for Brentford or the other performers backstage. It was for her. For the girl who had once been mocked and overlooked. For the girl who had fought to let her music speak louder than any doubt. She turned and walked off the stage, the silence of her footsteps following her like a quiet echo. The weight of the world that had once felt so heavy on her shoulders now seemed light, almost weightless. She wasn't walking to the cheers or the standing ovation. She wasn't chasing the spotlight or the fame. No, she was simply walking because the music had carried her here. And now, all she needed was the peace that came after. As she made her way toward the backstage area, she could see Brentford in the front row, still standing, his face pale and thoughtful. She didn't look at him directly, but she could feel the shift in him. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to be the one to silence the room with nothing but the sound of her heart and her hands. She had been nothing more than a blind girl to him before. But now? Now she was the music. The backstage hallway was quiet again. The bustling sound of performers preparing for their turn, the crew moving around. It all seemed far away now. As she walked past the familiar walls, the cold air felt strangely comforting. It was the same corridor where she had stood before, bruised by words, but now she walked with the confidence of someone who had learned to trust herself. She stopped for a moment, her hand brushing the cool wall. It was in this corridor that her journey had truly begun. It was here that the music had started to find her, to show her what she was capable of, even when the world couldn't see it. And now, it was the same corridor where she had left behind all the doubts, the fears, and the hurt. They had no place here anymore. As she walked past, she noticed Thomas standing in the corner. His eyes were full of warmth, his head slightly bowed in respect. He didn't need to say anything. He knew. He had known all along. The quiet strength she had found, the resilience that had blossomed from her pain, was something only a few people would ever truly understand. "You did it," Thomas said, his voice low but full of pride. Lena nodded, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper, a recognition that what she had done wasn't for anyone else. It had always been for herself. It had always been about the music, about finding her voice not through words but through every note that had flowed from her heart. The applause still echoed in her mind, but she knew it was not the applause that mattered most. It was the silence that followed. The silence where the music truly lived. The silence where she remembered who she was. As she passed by the curtain, she heard the soft shuffle of footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know. It was Brentford. He was there, standing in the dim light, waiting for her to acknowledge him. But she didn't, not because she was angry, but because she didn't need to. She had already done what she had set out to do. The world had heard her, and for the first time she could finally hear the quiet peace inside herself. The silence that remembered her name.